I feel like those opening moments of any film present a unique challenge against anything else that happens later on.
Right.
And that the first several minutes of this film are absolutely captivating. And a big part of that is the very stylized way in which these opening scenes are rendered. It's almost like a kind of montage way of editing. They're very short snippets of interactions or gestures, interspersed with often a whole fade out and fade back in, sometimes even within the same scene.
Right.
So
it's like if you could have a montage of one
conversation. Yeah. So it's really quite fascinating. There's kind of this staccato sort of rhythm to it, and also a intense kind of I don't know how to put it, like focus on one single action or one single gesture.
Yeah, there's a focus, but there's also a like out of time quality to it. Like these are like, I feel like we've talked about this on the podcast before in relation to some movie, or maybe not, or maybe I just read about it with relation to some movie, but I forget what, but there's this quality in this film of like the moments are given like a greater significance
Andrei
than the
Rublev.
amount of... Okay.
We talked about this when
We did?
we had our conversation about Andrei Rublev with Nathan.
It's like the moments are given a greater significance than the like amount of time that they're given
Yes.
on screen by these like punctuations.
Yes.
And like there's also a leisurely quality, because you can call it staccato, but it has this like languorous quality to the slow fade.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Nathan.
Sure, yeah, and maybe if perhaps there's a clip that will show that might just give a quick emphasis on this,
Yeah,
but just for those who don't have the opportunity to see that, what we're describing is this film has a very kind of matter of fact approach to narrating certain events from the life of Saint Thérèse, and the way it does this, it has it's almost like I don't want to say like a newsreel, but it's basically like events are happening. These, what we're describing as moments, these are moments that are mostly taken from passages in A Story of a Soul. So to someone who is familiar with the life of Saint Thérèse, most of these will be very familiar, but they're told without, the thing to note is that they're told without any real sense of drama. There isn't kind of it's not a dramatic treatment. The whole of the film is not a dramatic treatment of the life of Thérèse. There are no conflicts per se. There are no obstacles to overcome. There isn't really the classic kind of 3 or 4 or 5 act structure to it. The film itself is really treating this as kind of one almost stream of consciousness, like kind of series of events from beginning to end. And that's definitely that is the most striking thing about it, is that it's really not trying to tell you a story. There isn't any kind of real sculpting of this as a narrative. It's a series of events that are just linked together, and then it ends. And
the kind of homogeneity of the setting contributes to that as well.
Yes, that is another really awesome part of this film, is that it looks like, well, this is how Thomas described it. It looks like it's all shot inside of like a 1990s like photo,
like
studio.
A family photo with like the sort of like very slightly textured background.
But it's awesome because you'll just have these like amazing sequences where you'll move from one room to another room, and it'll just be a camera pan from one portion of this lit studio to another lit portion of this same studio.
Right.
And it's sort of, again, I mentioned this sort of like intense focus of the way that it's edited. Well, there's also this kind of intense focus that comes from this stripping away of all of the extraneous parts of setting and place and objects. There's a real economy, not just in the way this story is related to us, but also in the way that it's dramatized and presented. We were watching this, and Thomas said this must have been the lowest budget film ever made, and it's not a bad thing. The result is something actually really cool that I can't say that I've seen before in film,
Yeah.
And
you could like say, you can see like, you could say something about the theater, but it's really not a theatrical film.
Right.
Like,
right.
yes, they do that on stage, on theater stages where they have like different parts of the set lit and different things, but it's its own type of thing.
Right. Yeah. So, like there are plenty of films that you watch them and you think, I'm thinking in particular of some films from like the 40s and 50s where it's like, this is staged just like you would in a theater setting. In fact, we talked about this in our first episode with you, Nathan, when we talked about A Man for All Seasons. There's some films you watch them and you're like, this is basically indistinguishable from theater. They've just set up a camera to capture it all. And that's not what's going on here. Here, there's a tremendous sensitivity to the camera and to what the camera is capturing and to the angles at which things are being shot and a lot of close-ups and, even...
The whole thing is close-ups, basically.
Yeah. And even the interaction between the camera and the space is... There's an acknowledgement of how this is different from theater. I'm thinking in particular of this one amazing moment when Thérèse she's just given her like initial profession and she's being admitted into the cloister, and she moves from sort of the room where she's saying goodbye to her family and to her friends, and she passes through darkness with one of the sisters, and they're holding two candles, and all that the camera captures in this moment as they're passing through the darkness is the light from these candles, and then they emerge into the light of the cloister, and it's like that's amazing. That's something uniquely cinematic, but also sort of utilizing space in the way that theater might utilize it. So the result is something, like I said, very unique, very exciting, something I haven't seen in film before, and I think it is very effective given the subject matter. This attention to these moments in Thérèse's life,
and that there's no exteriors in the entire film.
Yeah,
it's just about life in the cloister. You don't see any outside ever.
Right.
Yeah. And so those are that's James, you're hitting exactly on kind of again the reason why I picked this film as far as like talking about Saint cinema, which is that this film is basically working against all of the kind of established conventions of not just popular cinema, but I would say most mainstream and art cinema, in the sense that the draw of cinema as an art of the real, is that you can go out and shoot things on location.
Right.
You can dramatize events that are happening in these locations that you could not possibly reproduce the effect of on stage. And so on the question of the kind of like the traditional theater versus cinema, battle, this has always been like an argument in favor of cinema as far as an art of the real, of trying to create an effect that is more visceral. And here's a film doing the opposite. It's taking us into a entirely theatrical space. It's this entirely abstract space where the background doesn't matter. We are only given the most bare kind of set decorations to tell us whether we're in the convent or we're in the Martin's home, or just the very rudimentary basics to tell that okay, we are in a new space. And so it's kind of pushing back on this. And then the thing is, though, as you said, James, it still remains 100% compelling and vital as a cinematic experience, losing the realism of shooting this on set, on stage, or excuse me, on location. Yeah, we can think of any number of productions that would have maybe tried to shoot a Thérèse film on location in Lisieux, like in the real Les Buissonnettes where she grew up, or in the real convent or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that either. That's a wonderful idea, if that's possible. But to choose consciously to, no, we're going to focus on something else. And so the question then becomes, what is that something else? If the draw of cinema, if we could say like the thought of why make a film about a saint and then do it in this way, if the the draw of a film, of creating a film to do that, is to try to somehow get closer to the saint, get closer to who was this person, try to come, understand their essence in some way. Then one strategy, and that's one that this director Alain Cavalier has chosen to do, is to do away with what seems to be extraneous, the questions of realism, really, and get into something else. The question kind of is, what is that something else, and does he succeed in getting there, so to speak?